All right, we have two more speakers to look forward to this afternoon. The first one is Derek Kuldinow from Stanford University, who is an SSGF fellow in the field of multidisciplinary computational sciences. And he has done two practicums, one at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory and one at Los Alamos National Laboratory.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So my presentation is entitled The Development of 10-Moment Fluid Models for Magnetized Plasmas. I'm in the Plasma Dynamics Modeling Laboratory at Stanford University under the advisement, or I guess having just finished up being advised, by Dr. Ken Hara. And a big thank you to the SSGF for funding the majority of my PhD. So just a brief outline of my presentation. I'll start with the introduction and some motivations for this work, as well as some theory. I'll then talk about specifically the 10-moment model, what that means, and then I'll talk about some ongoing work and the prospects for future study. So why do we need plasma modeling in the first place? Well, plasmas have applications in semiconductor manufacturing, as well as we all know, fusion energy, as well as astrophysical plasmas. And what all three of these have in common is it's very difficult to take accurate high-resolution measurements of the plasma properties, either due to the high temperatures, the short timescales, or the sheer distance in the case of astrophysical plasmas. So we have to develop our predictive modeling capabilities in order to understand the physics at play inside of these plasmas. So something in particular that's important to capture in these models is what is known as either kinetic effects or non-equilibrium effects. And that's because plasmas exist at the transition between the collisional and the rarefied regimes. So when the plasma is collisional enough, you can make a lot of assumptions about the distribution of the velocities of the particles in the plasma. So to give an example, I've initialized a bunch of particles here, and I'm going to let them collide elastically. The x and y axes here are the x and y velocities of the particles. And so after a certain amount of time, it is commensurate with the collision rate. All of these initially different distributions relax back to the same isotropic Maxwellian distribution. So what is typically done in a lot of the predictive codes today for speed is to assume an isotropic Maxwellian distribution. So instead of having to capture like all millions and billions and innumerable number of particles, you can describe the plasma in terms of things like the density, the velocity, and the temperature at a certain point. But the plasma is only fully described by those three parameters in the limit of total collisional equilibrium. So what we're trying to do is develop a fluid model that can capture certain amounts of non-equilibrium or kinetic effects within a still fluid framework. So we're going to focus on the particular kinetic effect of temperature anisotropy. So what I'm showing here is a representative velocity distribution function. You can think of it as a continuous version of the particle phase space density plots I showed on the earlier slide. And this temperature anisotropy can come from plasma wall interactions. It can come from magnetic fields that restrict the transport in the perpendicular directions. It can come from collisional effects in between species. So if you have like a beam of electrons interacting with stationary neutrals, there's preferential heating in the direction of the beam velocity. And also, if there are multiple populations of, say, electrons, that can also cause preferential heating in a particular direction. So this is not just kind of like a mathematical curiosity, but this temperature anisotropy also changes the transport properties through the modification of the pressure gradient force and the diamagnetic drift. You can affect reaction rates because it also changes the electron energy distribution function. And this temperature anisotropy can also induce magnetic fields through what's known as the Weibel instability. So as I mentioned before, as modeling can be broadly divided into kinetic models that try to capture the entire distribution of particle velocities, and the fluid models that make certain assumptions on the distribution in order to reduce the degrees of freedom and make these simulations more computationally efficient. So generally, the kinetic models are valid over a wider range of plasma conditions, whereas the fluid models are mostly valid in the regime of highly collisional systems. But what's known as higher order moment models are a way to introduce self-consistently more degrees of freedom into the fluid model to capture more of the kinetic effects. So specifically talking about the 10-moment model, I have equations down here. The first two are the conservation of mass and momentum, and the third one is a generalization of the conservation of energy, where we're taking into account the temperature or the pressure in all three of the velocity dimensions. I won't go into too much detail, but we developed this heat flux closure for the fluid model, and it's been developed for both electrostatic and electromagnetic systems. So the first test case we looked at was actually in a low temperature plasma, this Hall effect thruster. And what's interesting here is what is the experiments and the kinetic results have found that there is a higher degree of transport of electrons across magnetic field lines than what's predicted by classical theory. And the primary explanation for this right now is turbulent and wave-driven phenomena. So this 10-moment model, which is able to capture anisotropy and also velocity shear, is a good candidate for being able to better capture this anomalous electron transport. So I'll skip through the details of the setup. Essentially, it's a 1D anode-cathode gap with neutrals, ions, and electrons. And this is the main result. And we're looking at the full temperature tensor inside of the plasma. On the left is the fluid model, is the 10-moment fluid model. And on the right is the kinetic particle and cell model. And you can see that at the 10-moment model does a fairly good job in capturing the temperature anisotropy. It can be up to 10 or 20%, and is you get qualitative similarities, especially in the region near the wall, and at the exit of the discharge chamber of the thruster. The next test case we looked at was the Weibull instability. It's hypothesized that this was one of the mechanisms for magnetogenesis in the universe that also generates magnetic fields around supernova remnants. And it's also been hypothesized that this exists inside of ICF implosions in the expanding plasma bubble and can generate strong magnetic fields there. So this is another test case to demonstrate the ability of the 10-moment model to capture the Weibull instability. Now, traditional so-called 5-moment equilibrium fluid models would not be able to capture the Weibull instability at all. This is a comparison of the dispersion relations, and they're pretty similar in between the kinetic and the fluid models. And this is a plot of the growth rate of the magnetic field. And you can see that even in the regimes where the 10-moment model has a bigger discrepancy in the capturing of the exact growth rate, they still come to about the same saturation magnetic field strength. And here's a plot of the magnetic field profiles due to the Weibull instability. Now, you can see that after saturation, even though the actual magnetic field strength is about the same, but the energy that is stored in the magnetic field is about the same, the actual topology of the magnetic field is quite different in between the two. So future studies will be looking at this in a more coupled test case to determine if the specific magnetic field profiles are also important in the end state of the experiment. The third test case is a fully coupled simulation that's still pretty preliminary work that came out of a collaboration with Lawrence Livermore National Lab as part of a practicum. And essentially what happens in the experiment is you have a copper foil, gets hit by a laser, it generates a plasma that then expands. So what I'm plotting here is the azimuthal magnetic field profiles, assuming isotropic pressure on the left and anisotropic pressure on the right. And you can see that the shock propagation is about the same, but actually the strength of the magnetic field in the anisotropic pressure test case is a lot higher, and you get a lot more of this small-scale features that are indicative of the Weibull instability. I'll also mention it affects the electron density. It slightly expands the bubble faster. I will note that there are still some unexplained features that we have to look into in future work. But like one main metric out of this is the width of the so-called compressed gas region. And these are the experimental data, which predicts about 580 micrometer width. And the isotropic simulations have about 400 micrometer, whereas the anisotropic is a lot closer to experiment. And there's still some future work to be done here, but this is very promising. And so just the conclusions. This 10-moment system is a very new and interesting way to be capturing more of these kinetic effects within a fluid framework. And it's non-perturbative, so it can be kind of implemented into existing codes pretty easily. And I'll leave it there. Yeah, thank you very much.